In the colonial Maryland tobacco fields, beneath an Arundel County's rolling hills, rests a secret so troubling that for more than 2 centuries, the Catholic Church has attempted to purge it from history. From 1734 to 1768, a dozen parishes throughout the colony came under the dominion of a family whose name still causes elderly parishioners to fearfully cross themselves. The Thornton family did not merely serve God. They impersonated him, twisting the sacred rite of confession to construct an empire of terror that would render modern organized crime trivial by comparison. What you are about to hear has been reconstructed from sealed church archives, coded journals found in 1892 within a Maryland farmhouse wall, and testimonies suppressed for almost 300 years. This is not simply another account of religious corruption. This is the chronicle of how 3 men exploited the confessional booth to dominate an entire colony using blackmail, poison, and the most perverse violation of sacred trust ever recorded in American history. Before we proceed with the narrative of the Thornton family and their web of ecclesiastical terror, I must pose a question. This channel is not intended for everyone, only for the most courageous individuals who dare to unearth the dark secrets history attempted to hide. If you are among the select few brave enough to listen to these forbidden stories, click that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. I am also curious, leave a comment below stating which state or city you are listening from. Are you brave enough to reveal your location as we plunge into this nightmare together? Now, let us journey back to Maryland. To the year 1734, where evil dressed in a priest's collar. Colonial Maryland in the autumn of 1734 existed in a precarious balance between Protestant and Catholic tensions, religious battleground where the Catholic influence of the Calvert family maintained its grip despite mounting Anglican pressure. Within this volatile climate, the modest port town of Havenwood, situated along the Severn River roughly 20 miles southeast of Annapolis, symbolized all that the Catholic Church struggled to preserve in the New World. By colonial measures, Havenwood was not large, perhaps 800 inhabitants dispersed across tobacco plantations and the humble businesses that supported them. But what it lacked in population, it compensated for in influence. The town's Catholic families dominated much of the tobacco commerce flowing through the Chesapeake Bay, their names listed on shipping manifests that extended from London to the Caribbean. The Crothers possessed 3 plantations and a fleet of merchant ships. The Whitmore family managed the largest tobacco warehouse between Baltimore and Annapolis. The Ashfords had established their wealth on tobacco and the less discussed yet highly lucrative slave trade. The center of this Catholic stronghold was St. Bartholomew's Church, a sturdy brick building whose bell tower was visible to ships entering the Severn River. St. Bartholomew, unlike Europe's grand cathedrals, embodied the practical nature of colonial architecture. Robust oak pews, simple glass windows, and thick walls built to endure both Maryland's humid summers and the sporadic raids by pirates who still haunted the Chesapeake. Yet, it was what existed inside those walls that would make Street Bartholomew notorious. In the late summer of 1734, Father Thomas Thornton came to serve as parish priest, bringing an unusual petition. He desired to install new confessional booths, not merely 1 or 2, but 4 intricately built wooden chambers he asserted would better accommodate the spiritual needs of his expanding congregation. Father Thornton was not the priest most parishioners anticipated. Standing nearly 6 feet tall and imposing, with prematurely gray hair and sharp blue eyes, he wielded an intelligence that felt almost predatory. He spoke with the polished accent of a man educated in European seminaries. Yet, his demeanor hinted that he comprehended the harsh realities of colonial life more deeply than most clergymen. His frequent smiles during those initial months never truly reached his eyes. What the Street Bartholomew parishioners did not know was that Father Thornton had passed the previous 5 years journeying across Maryland, visiting Catholic parishes, and meticulously noting their most affluent and powerful members. He had examined their business affairs, their family ties, their strengths, and, most crucially, their potential weaknesses. He had not arrived in Havenwood to redeem souls. He had come to collect secrets. The confessional booths Father Thornton installed were masterworks of deceitful artistry, constructed by his nephew Marcus, a proficient carpenter who had allegedly learned his craft in Philadelphia. Each booth seemed to be a conventional 3-chambered confessional, a central section for the priest bordered by 2 kneeling compartments for penitents. Their dark oak structure and detailed carved crosses bestowed an aura of sacred solemnity that awed even the wealthiest parishioners. But concealed within the walls of each confessional was an innovation that would have appalled the faithful had they found it. Marcus Thornton had built a network of hollow metal tubes that extended from each penitent's chamber to a hidden recording room under the church. These tubes, made of tin and meticulously angled to transmit sound clearly, enabled every whispered confession to be overheard and documented in the basement below. The recording mechanism was brilliantly straightforward. The metal tubes channeled into small echo chambers equipped with curved metal surfaces that amplified sound. An individual stationed in the basement chamber could perceive conversations from the confessionals above with remarkable clarity. But Father Thornton implemented an additional step. He instructed his younger nephew Samuel to transcribe these dialogues using a personal cipher, generating permanent accounts of every confession made at St. Bartholomew. The initial casualty of the Thornton family's plot revealed himself on a frigid February morning in 1735, unaware he was stepping into a trap set over 6 months. Richard Whitmore entered St. Bartholomew that Tuesday morning, bearing a weight that had tormented him for weeks. As one of Havenwood's most prosperous tobacco merchants, Whitmore was renowned throughout the colony for his strict obedience to Catholic doctrine and his generous church donations. His reputation was founded on integrity, equitable transactions, and a moral uprightness that attracted other merchants as business partners. But Richard Whitmore concealed a secret capable of annihilating all he had established. 3 months prior, while conducting business in Annapolis, Whitmore had met a young woman named Catherine Mills, an indentured servant employed at the tavern he frequented during business trips. Catherine was 19, captivating in a manner that made men neglect their vows, and confined by an indenture contract with 4 years remaining. What started as casual talk had evolved into something Catholic doctrine deemed a most severe sin, adultery. As Whitmore knelt in the confessional that February morning, his voice a faint whisper, he expressed his guilt to Father Thornton. He spoke of his shame, his betrayal of his wife Margaret, his desecration of his holy marriage vows. He detailed his continuing involvement with Catherine, his intention to buy her indenture contract, and his dread that the affair would be exposed, ruining his family's reputation. Father Thornton listened with the rehearsed empathy of a confessor, providing comforting words and assuring Whitmore that God's forgiveness awaited all who sincerely repented. He assigned a penance of prayers and charitable gifts, then blessed Whitmore as the merchant exited the confessional, tears of relief on his face. But in the basement below St. Bartholomew, Samuel Thornton had transcribed each word of Whitmore's confession, encrypting it with his uncle's cipher. The young man's penmanship was exact as he documented details that would soon become weapons. Catherine Mills, indentured servant at the Brass Lantern Tavern in Annapolis. Contract holder Jonathan Pierce. Relationship ongoing since November 1734. Whitmore intends to purchase indenture within the month. The conversion of this holy confession into a blackmail instrument commenced precisely 1 week later. Father Thornton asked for a private meeting with Whitmore, stating he needed to address a matter of urgent spiritual concern. They convened in the priest's study on a Thursday evening, the space illuminated solely by candles that cast shifting shadows on walls crowded with theological books. Richard, Father Thornton started, his voice emitting a seemingly genuine warmth, I have been praying extensively regarding our discussion last week, and God has shown me a path that could alleviate your burden. Whitmore leaned forward with eager hope, his expression indicating he believed his spiritual advisor had discovered an answer to his moral dilemma. The church faces considerable upcoming expenses, Father Thornton continued. We intend to broaden our charitable endeavors, possibly creating a fund to aid indentured servants in dire situations, particularly young women in vulnerable positions. The priest's pause was expertly timed, letting the implications settle before he proceeded. I feel God is summoning you to provide a significant contribution to this fund, maybe £50 initially, followed by monthly donations of £10. This would confirm the sincerity of your repentance while assisting others who might be in circumstances akin to Miss Mills. The blood vanished from Whitmore's face as he comprehended what had just occurred. Father Thornton had not only remembered every aspect of his confession but was now employing that sacred information to extort money. The priest's kindly expression remained unchanged. But Whitmore detected something icy and shrewd in those blue eyes. Father, our discussion was under the confessional seal, Whitmore stammered. It remains so, Father Thornton responded smoothly. I would never breach that sacred trust. But God communicates with me in various ways, Richard. Occasionally through prayer, sometimes through divine insight. He has disclosed to me your wish to assist young Catherine. And I am merely presenting you a sanctified method to direct that charitable instinct." Whitmore sat in shocked silence, his merchant intellect rapidly assessing the consequences. £50 was a large amount, but affordable. £10 monthly would be more challenging, yet not unfeasible. The alternative, exposure of his affair, would ruin his marriage, his business connections, and his status in the community. "And if I were to contribute to this charitable fund," Whitmore began cautiously, "then I trust God would favor your discretion in all your private affairs," Father Thornton answered. "The Church has perpetually been a refuge for those striving to live virtuously, away from the scrutiny of gossips and meddlers." Whitmore consented to the payments, convincing himself that he was indeed executing a charitable deed that could benefit other young women in tough situations. He could not know that he was the first of what would become hundreds of victims, or that his confession had served as the trial for a blackmail scheme that would proliferate across Maryland like a pestilence. That night, as Whitmore walked home along Havenwood's serene streets, he experienced a chill unrelated to the February wind. He could not dismiss the sensation that his life had irrevocably altered, that he had passed an invisible boundary with no return. Behind him, St. Bartholomew's bell tower ascended against the starry sky like a dark spire aiming toward heaven, or maybe toward somewhere else entirely. The triumph of the Whitmore blackmail assured Father Thornton that his system was not only workable but possibly much more lucrative than he had originally conceived. In the ensuing months, he initiated the second stage of his scheme, a methodical expansion that would ultimately convert the religious terrain of colonial Maryland into his personal criminal domain. The linchpin of this expansion was Father Thornton's two nephews, both meticulously prepared for their functions in the family enterprise. Marcus, the older at 28, had the technical expertise required to build the altered confessionals, while Samuel, just 21, had been educated since youth in transcription and encoding. Yet, what rendered the Thornton plot truly fiendish was that both young men were legitimately ordained priests, having finished their seminary training in Baltimore with their uncle's guidance and financial backing. By the spring of 1735, Father Thornton had obtained appointments for his nephews at two more parishes. Marcus was allocated to St. Michael's in the port community of Easton, while Samuel assumed leadership of the faltering parish of St. Joseph's near Chestertown in the Tobacco region. Each appointment included the same appeal, authorization to install new confessional booths to better serve their congregations. The expansion approach was deliberate and patient. Instead of trying to blackmail every parishioner who confessed a secret, the Thorntons concentrated on what they called productive sins, transgressions by individuals with both the riches to pay sizable amounts and the social status that made exposure truly catastrophic. Adultery was perfect, but they also singled out embezzlement, tax fraud, illicit business activities, and the diverse corruptions pervasive in colonial trade. Their communication network matched the sophistication of their confessional alterations. Utilizing a web of merchant associates and itinerant peddlers, the three priests sustained regular contact via coded letters that seemed to concern ordinary church matters but actually held detailed intelligence about potential victims and their weaknesses. A letter depicting a spiritual revival among tobacco farmers might actually be relaying that multiple plantation owners had confessed to tax evasion. A petition for extra prayer books for the Women's Society could be encrypted instructions regarding which wealthy widow had confessed to an affair with her overseer. By the close of 1735, the Thornton network was producing substantial revenue from 12 regular victims across 3 parishes. Richard Whitmore stayed their most dependable source, his monthly payments now risen to £15 as Father Thornton declared the church's charitable requirements had expanded. But the Whitmore case had also educated the Thorntons a vital lesson about manipulating their victims' psychology. Rather than just demanding payment for silence, Father Thornton had engineered an elaborate justification system that let his victims preserve their self-esteem while paying extortion. The money was consistently presented as charitable donations, penance payments, or contributions to specific church initiatives. Victims were persuaded to view themselves as benevolent patrons rather than blackmail targets, a psychological manipulation that diminished the chance of resistance or reckless actions. The system's efficacy was most vividly demonstrated in the instance of Edmund Cothas, the wealthy plantation owner whose shipping enterprise dominated much of the Chesapeake Bay trade. Cothas had confessed to methodically falsifying his cargo manifests to evade full Crown customs duties, a practice that, while common, was technically treasonous and penalized by confiscation of all his assets. When Father Thornton approached Cothas about making a substantial donation to the church's mission for the poor, the plantation owner initially objected. But the priest's mild reminder that God observes all our commercial transactions, even those performed in the shadows of the customs house, was enough to secure Cothas' compliance. Within half a year, Cothas was donating £25 monthly to what he thought was a fund assisting impoverished Catholic families across Maryland. The psychological impact on their victims became evident as the months advanced. Richard Whitmore, formerly recognized for his cheerful disposition and social assurance, grew increasingly isolated and nervous. He started attending Mass daily instead of weekly, as if extreme piety could offset his guilt. His wife Margaret observed the change but ascribed it to business strains and her husband's intensifying religious commitment. Edmund Cothas exhibited different symptoms. Always a precise record keeper, he grew fixated on his business papers, dedicating hours each night to examining manifests and correspondence as if hunting for proof of some error or omission. His slaves reported he would occasionally awaken at midnight and demand to personally inspect cargo loads already verified multiple times. But the most alarming transformation happened in the parishes themselves. The Thornton priests had generated an environment of spiritual fervor verging on fanaticism. Their sermons heavily emphasized themes of concealed sin, divine retribution, and the need for total honesty before God. They promoted frequent confession, sometimes implying that parishioners who waited over a week without confessing risked eternal damnation. This spiritual coercion established a feedback loop that directly supplied the blackmail system. Parishioners frightened of holding unconfessed sin started confessing not just major transgressions, but also minor missteps, improper thoughts, and business practices that may not have been fully ethical. The Thorntons' confession archives expanded with intelligence about colonial Maryland's elite, forming a comprehensive repository of secrets that would have been priceless to any criminal organization. By early 1736, Father Thornton was prepared to execute the third phase of his plan, a massive expansion that would stretch his network across Maryland and potentially into adjacent colonies. He had pinpointed 16 additional parishes where his techniques could be applied. And he had started recruiting more family members and trusted allies who could be taught to operate confession recording systems. But the expansion would necessitate surmounting a major obstacle. The Catholic Church's leadership in Baltimore had started to observe the unusual construction projects undertaken by the Thornton priests. Bishop Carroll had specifically queried the necessity for such elaborate confessional installations in fairly small parishes, and whispers suggested he was contemplating formal inspections of churches with new confessionals. The solution Father Thornton conceived would prove to be both his crowning achievement and the commencement of his ruin. It entailed a degree of corruption so profound that it would eventually endanger the very foundations of Catholic authority in colonial Maryland, and it would compel the Thorntons to cross a threshold from which there was no going back. The winter of 1736 delivered an unforeseen crisis that would challenge the Thornton network's durability and expose the genuine depths of their dedication to their criminal operation. A young woman named Isabella Ashford, daughter of one of Havenwood's most distinguished Catholic families, had started to suspect that something was fundamentally amiss with the confessions she made at St. Bartholomew. Isabella was 19, endowed with the keen intellect that colonial society usually squandered on women but could not completely suppress. She had been taught by private tutors, spoke fluent French and Latin, and had cultivated an almost academic fascination with Catholic theology through her extensive reading of her father's religious texts. This education would become Father Thornton's first serious error. The prior autumn, Isabella had confessed to Father Thornton that she had been privately reading books the church deemed unsuitable for unmarried women. Specifically several philosophical works questioning conventional religious authority. It was a minor offense by colonial norms, but Father Thornton had seen a chance to gain control over the Ashford family fortune. Within a fortnight of her confession, Isabella noticed that Father Thornton had started embedding specific allusions to young women who contaminate their minds with dangerous ideas into his Sunday sermons. When he asked for a private conference with her father to address concerns about the spiritual welfare of young people in the parish, Isabella's suspicions solidified into near certainty. But Isabella Ashford was not satisfied with mere suspicion. She was resolved to investigate. Using abilities she had honed through years of scholarly research, Isabella commenced a systematic examination of Father Thornton's behavioral patterns. She recorded which parishioners were summoned for private meetings with the priest and tried to connect these meetings with their prior confessions. She observed which families had abruptly raised their charitable gifts to the church and attempted to determine what they might have confessed to inspire such generosity. Most importantly, Isabella began testing her theory via carefully controlled experiments. She confessed different fabricated sins to Father Thornton, alleging she had pilfered small items from local merchants, feigning she had entertained improper thoughts about married men, even concocting a tale about secretly reading Protestant religious texts borrowed from Anglican neighbors. Each time, Isabella watched closely for indications that Father Thornton was utilizing her confessions to manipulate her family's behavior. When she confessed to borrowing a silk handkerchief from Whitmore's general store, Father Thornton's subsequent sermon contained pointed references to those who take what doesn't belong to them, even in small matters. When she invented a romantic interest in a married tobacco merchant, the priest started advising her father about the importance of finding Isabella a suitable husband before her natural feminine weaknesses led her into temptation. But the experiment that convinced Isabella she was confronting something far more sinister involved a deliberate facade about her family's business practices. She confessed to Father Thornton that she had overheard her father discussing schemes to avoid customs duties on a European goods shipment by fraudulently declaring the cargo as tax-exempt religious materials. This confession was complete fiction. Isabella's father was meticulously honest in his business dealings, yet within days, Father Thornton had requested a private meeting with James Ashford to discuss the spiritual implications of certain business practices that might compromise a man's standing before God. Isabella realized with mounting horror that Father Thornton was systematically exploiting sacred confessions to blackmail his parishioners. But her investigation also uncovered something even more troubling. The operation's scope seemed to extend well beyond St. Bartholomew's parish. Through discreet inquiries among her social contacts in Annapolis and Baltimore, Isabella found that several other Catholic parishes had recently installed elaborate new confessional booths. When she cited the names of the priests involved, Marcus and Samuel Thornton, a pattern emerged indicating a coordinated criminal enterprise operating under religious authorities' guise. Equipped with this intelligence, Isabella made a decision that would have been inconceivable for most colonial women. She decided to confront Father Thornton directly. She requested a private meeting under the guise of seeking spiritual guidance concerning her impending engagement to Jonathan Pierce, a young merchant from Annapolis whom her parents had chosen as a suitable husband. The meeting was set for a Thursday evening in late February 1737 in Father Thornton's study next to the church sanctuary. Father Thornton welcomed Isabella with his customary display of paternal warmth, offering her tea and voicing his delight at her family's happiness about the engagement. But Isabella had not come for cordialities. "Father Thornton," she started, her voice steady despite the seriousness of her words, "I have cause to believe you have been violating the sacred confessional seal for financial extortion." The priest's benevolent expression remained unaltered, but Isabella detected a subtle shift in his posture. A slight stiffening indicating her accusation had struck true. "My dear child," Father Thornton replied with gentle worry, "I fear your upcoming marriage, and the natural anxieties it brings, may be giving you troubled thoughts. Perhaps we should discuss these concerns in confession where I can provide proper spiritual guidance." "I have no intention of confessing anything to you," Isabella responded firmly. "Instead, I want you to explain why your sermons consistently reference the specific sins parishioners confess to you privately. I want you to explain why families who confess certain transgressions later receive appeals for increased charitable donations. And I want you to explain the unusual construction of your confessional booths." Father Thornton's mask of benevolent concern finally slipped, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. When he spoke again, his voice carried a subtle threat that Isabella recognized as confirmation of her gravest fears. "Miss Ashford, I fear you have developed some very dangerous ideas. The kind of ideas that could cause great distress to your family if they became widely known. Perhaps it would be wise for you to focus on preparing for your marriage and leave theological matters to those with proper training." Isabella stood to leave, but Father Thornton's next words halted her at the door. I trust this conversation will remain between us. Your family has such a sterling reputation in this community. It would be tragic if that reputation were damaged by unfounded accusations against a servant of God. As Isabella walked home through Havenwood's dark streets, she realized she had not only verified her suspicions about Father Thornton's criminal activities but had also become a target. The priest's final words were a clear threat. Comply with his schemes or face consequences that could devastate her family's social standing. But Isabella Ashford had not spent years studying philosophy and theology to be intimidated by a corrupt priest. She had a plan that would either expose the Thornton network or lead to her own destruction. And she was ready to accept either outcome in the pursuit of justice. Isabella's plan required resources, allies, and a level of discretion that would test even her considerable intellect. She had identified the crime, confirmed the method, and confronted one perpetrator. Now, she needed proof that would persuade the Catholic Church's hierarchy to act against the Thornton network, and she needed that proof before Father Thornton could execute whatever retaliation he was planning. The key to gathering evidence was accessing the basement chamber under Street Bartholomew, where she suspected the confession recording system was housed. Isabella had studied the church's architecture during years of regular attendance, and she had noted several anomalies that now assumed sinister meaning: a perpetually locked basement door, unusual acoustic properties in the nave suggesting hidden chambers, and Father Thornton's frequent disappearances for extended periods when no services were scheduled. Her opportunity arose during the annual Lenten retreat in March 1737, when most parishioners would be attending special services at the Annapolis Cathedral. Father Thornton had declared that Street Bartholomew would be closed for cleaning and maintenance during the 3-day retreat, giving Isabella the access she needed for her investigation. But first, she had to neutralize the risk that Father Thornton might discover her activities and execute his threatened retaliation against her family. Isabella's solution demonstrated the strategic thinking that would have impressed military commanders of the time. She wrote a detailed letter outlining her suspicions about the Thornton network, including specific instances of correlations between confessions and subsequent sermons. The unusual confessional booth construction, and Father Thornton's implicit threats during their private meeting. She made multiple copies of this letter and arranged for their delivery to Bishop Carroll in Baltimore, the Maryland governor, and her cousin Thomas Ashford, an Annapolis magistrate, if anything should happen to her. The letters were held by a trusted family servant with instructions to deliver them immediately if Isabella failed to retrieve them by a specific date or if any harm came to her or her family. This dead man's switch effectively neutralized Father Thornton's ability to retaliate against her without triggering a full investigation of his activities. With this safeguard in place, Isabella proceeded with her infiltration of St. Bartholomew's basement during the Lenten retreat's second night. She had acquired keys to the church through her friendship with Margaret Whitmore, who served as the church's volunteer caretaker and had building access for cleaning. What Isabella found in the basement surpassed her worst expectations. The locked chamber under the confessional area had been transformed into an elaborate intelligence-gathering operation. The walls were lined with metal tubes channeling sound from the confessionals above, and a sophisticated system of curved metal reflectors amplified conversations with crystalline clarity. But most damning were the hundreds of coded documents filling several wooden cabinets, transcripts of confessions dating back nearly 3 years, organized by parish and cross-referenced by confessors' names. Isabella spent hours examining these documents, her horror mounting as she grasped the scope of the Thornton network's activities. The files contained not just confession transcripts but also detailed victim profiles, blackmail payment records, and correspondence among the 3 Thornton priests discussing their operations' expansion to additional parishes throughout Maryland and into Virginia. One file marked with unfamiliar symbols contained what seemed to be a list of parishioners who had somehow become problematic for the network. Isabella's blood ran cold as she realized several of these individuals had died mysteriously over the past 2 years. Deaths attributed to natural causes but which the coded document hinted might have been something else entirely. But the most disturbing discovery was a detailed plan for what the Thorntons termed their final solution, a systematic expansion of their blackmail network to eventually encompass every Catholic parish in the Chesapeake region, creating a criminal enterprise capable of dominating the colony's entire economic and political life. As Isabella carefully photographed key documents using a camera obscura technique from her scientific studies, she heard sounds from the main church floor that froze her blood. Father Thornton had returned early from the retreat, and his footsteps moved purposefully toward the basement stairs. Isabella barely had time to douse her candle and hide behind a filing cabinet before Father Thornton entered the chamber. Through a cabinet gap, she watched the priest move with practiced familiarity, checking the recording tubes and reviewing recent transcript files. But then he did something that confirmed Isabella's worst fears about the Thornton network's methods. From a locked cabinet drawer, Father Thornton removed a small glass vial holding a white powder. Isabella watched in horror as he carefully measured a portion into a separate container, then sealed both vials and returned them to their hiding place. Even in the dim candlelight, Isabella recognized the substance from her chemistry and medicine studies. Arsenic, the poison notorious as inheritance powder, for its effectiveness in removing inconvenient relatives. Father Thornton spent nearly an hour in the basement chamber, reviewing files and making notes in his coded journal. When he finally left, locking the chamber door behind him, Isabella remained hidden for another hour before emerging from concealment. Her investigation had not only confirmed the blackmail network's existence but had revealed something far more sinister. The Thorntons were prepared to commit murder to protect their criminal enterprise. The next morning, Isabella retrieved her letters from the servant and added extra pages documenting her basement discoveries, including detailed descriptions of the poison she had seen Father Thornton handling. She then faced a terrible choice. Should she wait to gather more evidence ensuring the Thorntons' conviction, or should she trigger the investigation immediately to prevent potential murders? The decision was made for her when she learned that Richard Whitmore had fallen violently ill after taking communion at Sunday Mass, showing symptoms perfectly matching arsenic poisoning. As Whitmore lay dying at home, attended by a physician diagnosing a sudden fever of unknown origin, Isabella realized the Thornton network had started eliminating witnesses threatening their operation. She had less than 24 hours to expose the conspiracy before more victims joined Whitmore in the grave. But the Thorntons had operated their network for nearly 3 years, and they had contingency plans Isabella was only beginning to comprehend. When she awoke the next morning to find 2 men watching her house from across the street, she realized her own life was now in immediate danger. The final confrontation between Isabella Ashford and the Thornton network would test not only her courage and intelligence but also her willingness to sacrifice everything, including her own life, to prevent a criminal conspiracy from achieving total control over colonial Maryland's Catholic population. The morning of March 15, 1737, dawned gray and cold over Havenwood, with a Chesapeake Bay fog muffling sound and blurring earth and sky boundaries. Isabella Ashford stood at her bedroom window, watching the 2 men who had maintained surveillance of her house throughout the night, their breath visible in the cold air as they pretended casual conversation while never shifting their gaze from the Ashford residence. Richard Whitmore had died during the night, his final hours marked by agonizing arsenic poisoning symptoms that the local physician, Dr. Benjamin Crawford, had misdiagnosed as putrid fever. Isabella knew Whitmore's death was both a message and a declaration of war. The Thorntons were prepared to kill anyone threatening their operation, and she would be next unless she acted immediately. But Isabella had spent the sleepless night preparing for this confrontation, and had devised a plan that would either destroy the Thornton network or expose their crimes so publicly that even her death couldn't silence the truth. Her plan's key was exploiting the one weakness she had identified in their operation: their arrogance and absolute confidence that colonial society would never believe a young woman's accusations against respected priests. At 8 o'clock that morning, Isabella walked calmly from her house directly toward the 2 watching men. Their surprise at her bold approach gave her the seconds needed to speak before they reacted. "Please inform Father Thornton that Miss Ashford requests an immediate meeting to discuss her recent spiritual concerns," she said loudly enough for several starting their day neighbors to hear. "Tell him I have documents I believe will interest him and that I'm prepared to discuss terms for their return." The men exchanged glances, clearly uncertain how to handle this development. After a brief, hushed conference, one nodded and headed toward St. Bartholomew, while the other continued watching Isabella. Father Thornton's response came within the hour. He would meet Isabella at 2 o'clock that afternoon in the church sanctuary, ostensibly to provide spiritual counseling for her grief over Richard Whitmore's death. The meeting location was ideal for Isabella's purposes. The sanctuary's excellent acoustics would ensure her conversation with Father Thornton would be heard clearly by witnesses she had positioned throughout the church. Those witnesses included her cousin Thomas Ashford, the Annapolis magistrate, who had arrived that morning responding to Isabella's urgent message, Dr. Benjamin Crawford, still puzzled by the unusual symptoms he had observed in Richard Whitmore, and Margaret Whitmore, who had agreed to help Isabella despite her own grief because she suspected her husband's death connected to his mysterious monthly church payments. But Isabella's most crucial witness was Bishop Carroll himself, who had traveled from Baltimore after receiving Isabella's detailed letter about the Thornton network. The bishop had initially been skeptical of accusations against 3 of his priests, but Isabella's evidence was compelling enough to warrant a personal investigation. At exactly 2 o'clock, Isabella entered St. Bartholomew's sanctuary to find Father Thornton waiting at the altar, his usual benevolent expression replaced by something cold and predatory. Afternoon light filtering through the church's plain windows cast long pew shadows, creating an atmosphere more suited to a trial than spiritual counseling. "Miss Ashford," Father Thornton began, his voice clear in the sanctuary, "I understand you have concerns about certain church matters you wish to discuss." "Indeed, I do, Father," Isabella replied, positioning herself so her voice projected to the hidden witnesses. "I've discovered that you and your nephews have been operating a criminal conspiracy violating the sacred confessional seal and using religious authority for extortion and murder." Father Thornton's mask of priestly concern completely fell away, revealing the calculating criminal beneath. "Those are very serious accusations, Miss Ashford. I hope you have substantial evidence to support such claims." "I have transcripts of recorded confessions from your basement chamber," Isabella replied, producing a document folder. "I have coded correspondence between you and your nephews discussing blackmail payments and your network's expansion to 16 additional parishes. And I witnessed you handling arsenic in the same basement where Richard Whitmore's confession was recorded. The same Richard Whitmore who died last night with arsenic poisoning symptoms." Father Thornton's eyes narrowed as he grasped the extent of Isabella's knowledge. "Miss Ashford, you have stumbled into matters far beyond your understanding. The work we do serves a higher purpose than your simple mind can comprehend." "Enlighten me, Father," Isabella said, her voice steady despite the danger she faced. "Explain how blackmailing your parishioners and poisoning those who threaten to expose you serves God's purpose." Father Thornton stepped closer, his imposing height casting a shadow over Isabella. "The Catholic Church in Maryland exists at Protestant authorities' pleasure, who would destroy us at the first opportunity. We have created a system ensuring our faith's survival and prosperity by securing our most influential members' loyalty. Those who contribute generously to our cause receive our protection. Those who threaten our mission face their betrayal's consequences." "You mean those who refuse your extortion demands are murdered?" Isabella said bluntly. "I mean that God works through his servants in mysterious ways," Father Thornton replied. Richard Whitmore had become unreliable. He was starting to ask questions, demanding to see how his charitable contributions were used. He represented a threat to our entire operation. Isabella felt a chill realizing Father Thornton was essentially confessing to murder, apparently confident she would not live to repeat his words. But he didn't know every word was being heard by Bishop Carroll and the other witnesses hidden throughout the sanctuary. "And what about me, Father?" Isabella asked. "Am I also a threat to your operation?" Father Thornton's smile was genuinely terrifying. "Miss Ashford, you are an unmarried young woman making hysterical accusations against respected priests. Who would believe such claims? Even if you made these allegations publicly, they would be dismissed as a disturbed mind's fantasies. But fortunately for both of us, that won't be necessary, because you intend to kill me as well. Because you're going to voluntarily withdraw these ridiculous accusations and destroy whatever evidence you think you've gathered," Father Thornton said. "You see, my dear, we know about your late-night activities in our basement. We know you violated God's house sanctity to steal church documents. More importantly, we have witnesses who will testify they saw you in Richard Whitmore's house the night he died. And we have evidence that you possessed arsenic for your chemical experiments." Isabella felt the trap closing as she realized the sophistication of the Thorntons' contingency planning. They had anticipated exposure possibility and prepared to frame her for Whitmore's murder. Even if you avoided murder prosecution, Father Thornton continued, the scandal would destroy your family's reputation. Your father's business relationships would evaporate. Your engagement to Jonathan Pierce would be terminated, and your family would be ostracized from decent society. All this can be avoided if you simply admit your accusations were feminine hysteria and emotional distress following Whitmore's death. And if I refuse, then I'm afraid you'll be found in your room tomorrow morning, having taken your own life in remorse for falsely accusing innocent priests and for your guilt over murdering poor Richard Whitmore. Father Thornton's expression became genuinely sorrowful, as if regretting his words. Suicide is a mortal sin, of course, but God is merciful to those whose minds have been disturbed by their own wickedness. Isabella realized this was the ultimate test moment, not just of her courage, but of her faith in justice and willingness to sacrifice herself to prevent greater evil. Father Thornton had revealed his network's full corruption extent and murderous willingness, but only because he was confident she would never live to expose him. You've made one critical mistake, Father Thornton, Isabella said, her voice ringing through the sanctuary. You've assumed I came here alone and unprepared. Father Thornton's confidence wavered slightly as Isabella raised her voice to address the hidden witnesses. Bishop Carroll, Magistrate Ashford, Dr. Crawford, I trust you've heard enough to understand the conspiracy's nature we're dealing with. Color drained from Father Thornton's face as Bishop Carroll emerged from behind the altar, followed by Thomas Ashford and the other witnesses. The priest's eyes darted toward sanctuary doors, but his escape was blocked by several armed men Magistrate Ashford had positioned outside. Thomas Thornton, Bishop Carroll said, his voice heavy with authority and disgust, by the power vested in me by the Holy Catholic Church, I hereby strip you of your priesthood and excommunicate you for crimes against the faithful. Magistrate Ashford, this man is now in your custody. But Father Thornton's surrender wasn't as complete as it seemed. As Thomas Ashford stepped forward with shackles, the defrocked priest suddenly lunged toward an altar cabinet, where Isabella realized he must have hidden a weapon. The confrontation's final moments would test not only Isabella's courage but also her willingness to use lethal force to prevent a murderer from escaping justice. The pistol shot echoed through St. Bartholomew's sanctuary like a thunderclap, followed by profound silence where Isabella heard her own heartbeat. Father Thornton lay motionless before the altar, the small knife he had drawn from the cabinet glittering in afternoon light beside his outstretched hand. Magistrate Ashford lowered his smoking pistol, his face grim, examining the body. He chose his own judgment, the magistrate said quietly. God help his soul. The investigation following Father Thornton's death uncovered the criminal conspiracy's full scope that had operated under religious authorities' cover for nearly 4 years. When Magistrate Ashford's men searched the basement chambers under St. Bartholomew's, St. Michael's, and St. Joseph's, they found extensive evidence of the blackmail network that had systematically exploited Confession's sacred trust to extort money from hundreds of victims. The coded documents recovered from the 3 churches depicted a criminal organization rivaling anything known to colonial law enforcement. The Thornton network had collected detailed intelligence on over 2,000 Maryland families, maintaining files cataloging their business dealings, personal relationships, financial vulnerabilities, and most intimate secrets. Their operations scope extended far beyond simple blackmail to include systematic tax evasion, customs fraud, and what appeared to be at least 7 murders disguised as natural deaths. Marcus and Samuel Thornton were arrested at their respective parishes attempting to destroy evidence of their conspiracy involvement. Both men initially claimed ignorance of their uncle's criminal activities, insisting they believed they were participating in legitimate church intelligence gathering designed to better serve parishioners' spiritual needs. But the coded correspondence recovered from their churches told a different story, revealing their active participation in planning blackmail operations and their knowledge of murders committed to protect the network. The Thornton nephews' trials became a colonial Maryland sensation, drawing observers from Philadelphia and Charleston. The proceedings revealed not only the blackmail operations' mechanics but also the network's penetration extent into colonial society. Victim testimony revealed the Thorntons had systematically targeted the region's wealthiest, most influential Catholic families, using their confessions to manipulate everything from business deals to political appointments. Dr. Benjamin Crawford's testimony proved particularly damning when he revealed he had treated 4 other patients over the past 2 years with symptoms similar to Richard Whitmore's final illness. All 4 had been regular parish church contributors, and all died after what families described as periods of increased anxiety about their spiritual well-being. Exhumation and examination of these bodies revealed arsenic traces confirming systematic poisoning. The psychological impact on Maryland's Catholic community was devastating. The revelation that 3 priests had violated confession's sacred seal to commit extortion and murder shattered the religious community's binding trust. Many families stopped attending Mass altogether, others demanded Bishop Carroll implement new safeguards preventing similar religious authority abuses. The economic consequences were equally severe. The Thornton network's blackmail operation had generated an estimated £12,000 over 4 years, a colonial fortune, much used to purchase property and investments throughout the Chesapeake region. Recovering and redistributing these ill-gotten gains became a complex legal process continuing nearly a decade after the trials concluded. Isabella Ashford's role in exposing the conspiracy made her both celebrated and controversial. While many praised her courage and intelligence uncovering the network, others criticized her for violating church property sanctity and questioned whether a young woman should have involved herself in such dangerous matters. The debate over Isabella's actions reflected broader colonial society tensions about women's roles and the proper relationship between individual conscience and religious authority. The Thornton affair's long-term consequences extended far beyond Maryland's Catholic community. The scandal contributed to growing Protestant suspicions about Catholic loyalty and provided ammunition for those arguing Catholics couldn't be trusted with colonial society authority positions. These tensions would persist well into the Revolutionary period and beyond, influencing religious freedom and church-state separation debates. Bishop Carroll implemented extensive reforms designed to prevent similar abuses, including mandatory church construction project inspections, regular priest rotations between parishes, and new church financial monitoring procedures. But the deeper question of how to prevent religious authority abuse while maintaining pastoral care effectiveness remained unresolved. The physical modifications the Thorntons had made to their churches were dismantled, but the buildings themselves remained in use, serving as permanent reminders of the corruption once operating within their walls. St. Bartholomew continued serving the Havenwood community, though many parishioners reported confession discomfort for years after the scandal broke. Marcus Thornton was executed in spring 1738, convicted of conspiracy to commit murder and multiple extortion counts. Samuel Thornton received a life sentence recognizing his younger age and apparently lesser murder planning role, though he died in prison under 2 years later under circumstances some observers found suspicious. The Thornton conspiracy's broader implications continued resonating throughout colonial American society for decades after the trials concluded. The case became a touchstone for religious freedom discussions, clergy accountability, and the proper church-state relationship. Legal scholars cited the Thornton precedent in debates about religious privilege limits and circumstances allowing secular authorities to intervene in church affairs. Isabella Ashford married Jonathan Pierce as planned, though the wedding was delayed nearly a year during the trials and their aftermath resolution. She never spoke publicly about her conspiracy exposure role, but private letters discovered after her 1782 death revealed she continued struggling with the psychological impact of her Thornton confrontation. In one 1745 letter to her cousin, she reflected on Justice's price. "Sometimes I wonder if the truth was worth the lives it cost and the faith it destroyed. But then I remember Richard Whitmore's final agony. And I know that some evils must be confronted regardless of the consequences." The Thornton family criminal conspiracy story serves as a reminder that corruption can flourish even within society's most sacred institutions, and that justice's price often falls most heavily on those with courage to speak truth to power. In colonial Maryland's tobacco fields, beneath St. Bartholomew's bell tower shadow, that courage's legacy endures as testament to the belief that no authority, religious or secular, is beyond accountability when it betrays the trust of those it claims to serve. But perhaps the Thornton affair's most chilling aspect is not what was revealed, but what remains hidden. The coded documents recovered from the 3 churches referenced other networks operating in Virginia, Pennsylvania, and the Carolinas, suggesting the Maryland conspiracy was part of a larger criminal enterprise possibly extending throughout colonial America. Despite extensive investigations, these other networks were never uncovered, leaving historians to wonder how many other secrets lie buried under America's oldest church's foundations. The final entry in Father Thomas Thornton's coded journal, discovered months after his death when investigators finally cracked his encryption system, contained a single chilling line: "The harvest is vast, but the workers are few. Others will continue what we have begun." Whether this was merely a dying criminal's desperate boast or a reference to accomplices escaping justice remains one of colonial America's most disturbing unsolved mysteries. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed, or do you think secrets still lie buried in America's oldest church's foundations? Leave your comment below sharing your thoughts about the Thornton conspiracy. If you enjoyed this dark colonial America tale and want more stories uncovering our nation's past hidden horrors, subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and share this video with historical mystery lovers. The past's shadows hold many secrets, and we're just starting to uncover them. See you in the next video, where we'll explore another forgotten horror that time tried to bury.